Eliphaz the Temanite suggests that Job thinks, oh, God can't see my wickedness. I can fool him, I can bamboozle him by claiming to be righteous. And yet really God knows and sees his wickedness. And yet Job insists, no. I know God can see me. The problem is, I can't see him. Well, let's open the book and think on these things. This is the Word of Truth Ministry video library. I am Nathan C. Johnson, Bible teacher. I greet you in the faith and fellowship of our great God and Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, whose we are, whom we love, and whom we serve. Let's open our Bibles to the book of Job, chapter 22. And we are now starting the third argument of Job's three friends, with the first of his three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite. Job 22 and verse 1. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said. So this is his third address. Now remember, Eliphaz, he argued in his first address especially, from human experience, Bildad, from human tradition, and so far from human merit. Now verse 2, and I'm going to be reading again from Bullinger's translation of the book of Job. Will mighty man advantage bring to God? Nay, he, though wise, can profit but himself. So Eliphaz says to Job, do you think that a mighty man can be profitable, can be beneficial to the mighty God, to El? No, Job, he says. Nay, he, though wise, can profit but himself. His wisdom only profits himself, the wise man's. He can't profit God. So he says, Job, are you thinking that you can bribe God into taking your side? Nope, you can't do it. That must be what you're thinking. You can bribe God into ignoring your wickedness. That's why you keep claiming to be righteous. Verse 3, to Shaddai is it gain if thou be just, or any profit if thy ways be pure? So he says, to Shaddai, the all-bountiful God that owns it all. Does he gain if you're just? Does he profit if you're pure? No. So, what would he gain or profit by mishandling your case? By ignoring your wickedness? Did you think you could bribe him again? Verse 4, from awe of thee will he debate with thee, or into judgment with thee will he come? So he says, well, God, be so in awe of you that he'll debate with you? Or will he fear you so much that he'll enter into court with you to see who's right? Verse 5, it may be that thy wickedness is great, and without number thine iniquities. So Eliphaz concludes that, well, if God wouldn't benefit from mistreating you, and if he wouldn't benefit from your righteousness or wickedness, well, therefore, of course, he's going to judge impartially. But what a thing to say about God. If God could get a benefit from twisting justice, he'd do it. But since he can't get a benefit from twisting justice, he's going to judge impartially. What? No, it wouldn't matter to God if he got a benefit from it. He'd judge impartially no matter what. So, he concludes that he's judging Job impartially. Therefore, he must have done this to Job because of great wickedness and infinite, or the word means endless, iniquities. Why he's doing this to you, Job. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. Verse 6, that thou didst take thy brother's pledge for naught, or didst strip off the garments of the poor. So he suggests that Job maybe took pledges from a brother. Now, a pledge, this basically would be in the case of giving out a loan, and you want to make sure the loan gets paid, so you take some guarantee. In our way of doing it, you put something up as collateral against the loan, like your house. In their way of doing it, you generally gave someone your outer garment in pledge. But this was a problem because, especially the poor, probably only had one outer garment. So in Deuteronomy 24, God gave a law about this. Verse 10, he said, "When thou dost lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge. Thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou dost lend shall bring out the pledge abroad unto thee." He says, don't act so distrusting. You say, "I want to go into your house and make sure I get your garment." No, let him bring it out to you. Verse 12, "And if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. In any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goeth down, that he may sleep in his own raiment, and bless thee. And it shall be righteousness unto thee before the Lord thy God." So he says, if the man is poor, then he says, let him sleep with his pledge. Give him back the coat you took as a pledge. You might say, well, that's not much pledge then. If you give it back, why, he has it and your money. How do you know he's going to pay your money back? Well, of course, you can always take him to court and take his pledge back if he doesn't repay it. But the point is, this guy is poor. This is probably the only outer garment he had. And moreover, when he sleeps at night, he probably doesn't have blankets. He probably covers himself with his outer garment as his only blanket. So what's he going to do tonight if you keep his outer garment as your pledge? Give it back to him. So this helps us put in context to what Eliphaz is accusing Job of. He's basically saying, you took a pledge from your brother for nothing. Why, you were such a scoundrel, you wouldn't even trust your brother to pay you back. And you took a pledge from him, and for practically nothing. A tiny little loan, you insisted on a pledge from him. Or you stripped off the garments of the poor. Far from letting the poor keep his garment when you loaned him money, you stripped it off and said, no, I'm not giving it back. I don't care if you have no blanket to sleep with tonight. He says, that's the kind of person you were, Job, to deserve what happened to you. Verse 7, or that thou didst not give the weary drink, or from the hungry thou withheldest bread. So he says, you saw someone who was weary and refused to give him a drink. You saw someone who was hungry and you refused to give him food. And of course, God considers it a righteous thing for the wealthy and powerful to help the weak and helpless and needy. And it was actually a wicked thing for a wealthy person to refuse to do this. They considered charity necessary to righteousness, what we call charity. And that's a very interesting perspective we all should think about, I think. Verse 8, thou mayest have said, the land is for the strong, and favored men alone should dwell therein. He says, you might have thought, I am strong, so I deserve to get all the land I want. I deserve to get everything I want. The strong survive, the strong are on top, so I can oppress the weak, and that's their problem. Who's going to tell me no? I'm strong, so I deserve it. He says, that's the kind of thing you must have said, Job, for this to happen to you. Verse 9, widows thou mayest have sent away unhelped, and robbed the fatherless of their support. Now, in their society, it was very important that a man, the patriarch, was in charge of all family businesses. And so a widow without a son to take over the business, without a man to run the business, why, she was in trouble. She was probably in need, in poverty, because no one would do business with a woman. So the widows would appeal to the wealthy and powerful, those who could help them. And he says, Job, you are wealthy and powerful, and yet it must be that maybe this helpless widow who you should have helped, you sent her away unhelped. And then the fatherless, same thing. The protection for children was their father, the patriarch of their family. If there was no father, if there was no patriarch, why, the fatherless would be helpless. It didn't matter if their mother was still around. She couldn't protect them. It was a father, grandfather, somebody had to protect the children. And a fatherless child needed support from the rich and the powerful who could help them. And he says, yet you, Job, you must have withheld such help from the fatherless. Verse 10, this may be why the snares are round thee spread, and terror cometh on thee suddenly. He says, this sort of actions might just be what you did, Job. Yeah, I think they just might be. That's why you suddenly experienced this terror that happened to you, this terrible thing that cometh on thee suddenly. And remember, Job's calamity did come on him suddenly. Remember, Satan timed it so that before the previous messenger was done speaking of calamity, the next messenger came to announce the next calamity. Satan wanted to make it clear to Job that it was a supernatural calamity. And he knew Job would blame God rather than him, which is exactly, of course, what Job and his friends did. But terror came on him suddenly, and his friend says, yeah, I think it might be because he did wicked things like this. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think that's right. Verse 11, and why the darkness thou canst not explain, and why the water floods o'erwhelm thy soul. He says, yeah, I think these wicked things are probably why this darkness happened to you. You can't explain the darkness, Job. You admit you can't explain it. Well, I can explain it. You did wicked things. You had water floods overwhelm you. I know why. It's because you're wicked. Verse 12. Is not Eloah high and heaven sublime? Behold the highest of the stars. How high? So he says that Eloah, that's the venerable God, the God who deserves to be worshipped. He says he is in heaven sublime, Bullinger translates it. The Hebrew says he's at heaven's head, heaven's source. In other words, he's saying every supernatural thing that happens, every height of heaven finds God as its source. That's what they're all thinking. The God, of course, is the source of what happened to Job. He says that Eloah is in heaven's source. And he says, behold the highest of the stars, how high. Look how high the stars are. Well, God is high like that, Job. Verse 13, and yet maybe thou sayest, how doth God know? And through the thickest darkness, can he judge? He says, I know what you're thinking secretly, Job. You won't admit it to us, but I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I can say these things in spite of the fact that I'm wicked. I can say these things and get away with it because God doesn't know. The mighty God, why, he doesn't know what I really did. He doesn't see my actions to judge them. He's in thick darkness. He's confused. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know what's really going on. So I can claim, hey, wait, I'm righteous. And he won't know the difference. But we're too smart. We know that you're not telling the truth. Verse 14, thick clouds enrobe him, that he cannot see. Alone he walketh in the vault of heaven. So again, he suggests that Job thinks that God's in the thick clouds. Maybe God is wandering around thinking about the things of heaven and not paying attention to what's going on earth, not paying attention to Job. He says, that's what you're thinking, Job. I know better. I know God was paying attention, and look what he did to you. See, that's proof. Well, again, this was an unfair charge against Job. And remember, how had Job acted as we had it described in chapter 1? Job was so careful of righteousness that when his children would get together for a birthday party, he would offer sacrifices for them thinking, well, my children maybe didn't do anything wrong, but one of them might have thought something wrong in his head, in his inner being, in his heart. And so I'll offer a sacrifice to God to apologize just in case one of my children thought a bad thing. That's how careful Job was about righteousness. And yet, Eliphaz accuses Job of thinking that he can be wicked and God won't see it. Well, there are people who think that way. They think they can be wicked and God won't see it. So Eliphaz wasn't wrong that there are people who think that way. But this was certainly an unfair charge to Job. Job was the opposite of that, if there ever was someone who was the opposite of that. He was always thinking that God could see him, that God could see every thought of his heart. Verse 15, oh, that thou wouldst consider well the way which wicked men of old have ever trod. So Eliphaz has set up this straw man, this Job, who thinks that God can't see his wicked ways. And now he's going to argue against this imaginary Job he set up, who's thinking this way. He says, Job, who thinks God doesn't see your wicked ways, oh, if only you would consider, well, the way which wicked men of old have ever trod. If only you'd look at what has happened to other wicked people, Job. You haven't thought about that, have you? You haven't thought about what happens to wicked men of the past. Look, I can prove it. You've been saying that wicked people don't have to pay for their wickedness in this life. Well, if you just look at the past, if you just look at times gone by, times of old, the Hebrew there is olam. If you just look at men in the flow of time before this, you would see that you're wrong. The way that wicked men always trod is down to calamity. Verse 16, they who are snatched away before their time, their strong foundation swept as with a flood. So he says, these wicked people, they died early, snatched away before their time. The strong foundation of their wealth that they depend on, it's swept away like a flood swept it away. So in other words, in spite of Job's argument based on reality, and Job of course was right, he's still insisting on the unreality of his philosophy, that all wicked people always get theirs, that no wicked person lives to a good old age, that no wicked person enjoys his prosperity up until his death, that they all get swept away, and he says the past proves it. Well, Job would say nonsense, and Job would be right. Verse 17, who unto God did say, depart from us, and asked, what good could Shaddai do to them? So he says, these wicked people told the mighty God, depart from me, mighty God, I don't need you. And they asked, what good would Shaddai, the all-bountiful God, what good would he do me? I can get good without him, I don't need him. Verse 18, yet he it was who filled their homes with good. The way of wicked men is far from me. He says, these wicked people who think this way don't consider that it's God who filled their homes with good. Like you, and you were wicked, Job, you didn't consider that. But then Eliphaz self-righteously judges himself, and he says, well, me, I'm not like you, Job. The way of the wicked is far from me. We can practically see Eliphaz's chest swelling in pride. Buttons flying off, his chest swelled so much. I'm being a little colorful there, but you can just see his pride. The way of wicked men is far from me. Unlike you, Job. Verse 19, the righteous see that they may well rejoice. The innocent will laugh at them and say. So he says, the righteous and the innocent, why, they just enjoy the sight of what happens to wicked men in the end. The innocent, they just laugh at them. Like you, Job. Something that happened to you, a wicked person, an innocent person like me, he just throws back his head and laughs. Ha 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 ha! I laugh at you, Job. Ha 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 ha! See, you got yours. You got what's coming to you. I can afford to laugh because I'm innocent. I can laugh at someone wicked like you getting what he deserves. Oh, that's really kind of Eliphaz, isn't it? Really good way to comfort his friend. Verse 20, surely our substance hath not been destroyed. Well, their abundance is consumed with fire. He says the righteous and innocent can say, well, look, my substance hasn't been destroyed. All my goods haven't been destroyed. That's what I can say to you, Job. My goods haven't been destroyed. You who've lost everything, your abundance is consumed with fire. So who are you to lecture me? What happened to you shows you are wicked. What happened to me shows I'm righteous. I still have my substance. So don't you dare say that my substance doesn't prove I'm more righteous than you. That's what Eliphaz is saying. Verse 21, acquaintance make with him, and be at peace, for thereby blessing shall come upon thee. So he says, here's my advice to you, Job. Get acquainted with God. I know you've been ignoring God and shoving him away and so forth. I know that because of what's happened to you. It wouldn't happen to you if you hadn't been doing that. But here's my advice. Become acquainted with God. Then you'll be at peace, and then you'll be blessed. He says, just take my advice and turn back to God, and everything will be wonderful and hunky-dory and peachy keen, and your life will be all good again. So is this true? If we just get to know God, then everything will be good in our lives and we'll be wealthy and prosperous? Well, for one thing, it's just not just up to us to make acquaintance with God. Could I walk up to God and say, God, I want to get to know you? Well, see, there's this little problem of my sin that comes between me and God and blocks me off from God. And apart from the cross, we just can't introduce ourselves to God and let him get to know us, and then he'll be happy with us. The Bible says all have sinned and fall short of the esteem of God. If God gets to know you, he's just going to know, wow, I don't respect this guy. He's a sinner. So Eliphaz is certainly wrong. A sinner can't just make acquaintance with God and then everything will be good. There's the little matter of the sacrifice that has to be paid. The problem is we're sinners. Verse 22, receive, I pray, instruction from his mouth, and lay up all his words within thy heart. He says you should come to God and listen to him and consider all his words. Well, what mouth is talking right now? Is it God's mouth that's talking? No, it's Eliphaz's mouth that's talking. And what Eliphaz wants Job to do is consider his words, not God's. But he says, consider God's words and everything will be better. Well, did they have any of God's words to lay up within their hearts? Now, people say that Job is the first book written in the Bible, and I think that's probably true. But I think that Genesis was a book that was passed from one prophet to the next. So I think there probably were parts of Genesis written by the time Job was written, even if Job was before Moses, which I think he probably was. They did have some of God's written word. But he seems to be suggesting God's instructions directly given. And more or less indicating that his words go right along with them. Verse 23, To Shaddai come thou back, submit thyself, and from thy tent put far away thy sin. He says, you need to return to the all-bountiful God. You need to come back to him. I know you've left him, Job. If you hadn't, this wouldn't happen to you. You need to come back to him and submit yourself. I know you're standing in proud rebellion against him, or this wouldn't have happened to you. Submit yourself. And then this sin I know you have hidden in your tent, put it far away. Well, I will admit, someone who had strayed from God, it would be good advice to come back to God. To someone who had rebelled against God, it would be good advice to submit to God. To someone who did have sin hidden in their lives, it would be good to put it away. But this was a false accusation when it came to Job. This was not true of Job. Verse 24, Then thou shalt lay up treasure as the dust, and gold of Ophir as the pebble stones. He says, Job, if you'll just be good, and if you'll just come back to God, why then you'll be rich again. Then you'll lay up treasure like dust. Of course, dust is so plentiful. He says, you used to have treasure like dust. You'll have it again if you'll just return to God. Then he says, and gold of Ophir is the pebble stones. Ophir means reducing to ashes. And it was apparently a land or perhaps a city in southern Arabia, maybe. It's hard for us to really identify where Ophir was. We don't know for sure. But we do know it was on Solomon's trade route. The Bible says that Solomon traded with Ophir. Apparently gold was available from Ophir, so he says, you'll get the treasures of Ophir like the pebble stones. Verse 25, Yea, Shaddai, he shall be thy precious ore, and his great strength is silver unto thee. So the all-bountiful God, he says, he'll be your ore. Or there is the same word as treasure in the previous verse. King James makes it defense, but it's the word that means treasure. So he says, Shaddai, the all-bountiful God, he'll be your treasure. He'll be your precious ore. And his great strength will be your silver. He says, look like me. I have God on my side. He's my precious ore. I have him with me. He's my silver. That's what Eliphaz claims. Verse 26, For then in Shaddai thou shalt take delight, and to Eloah thou wilt lift thy face. He says then, once you've returned to God and he's made you wealthy again, why then you can take delight in Shaddai, the all-bountiful God. And then he says when you come back to him and he makes you rich again, you can lift your face up in worship to Eloah, the venerable God who deserves to be worshipped. Unlike now, of course, when God strikes you down and you can't lift up your head to him, or he just strikes you down again. Verse 27, Then shalt thou pray to him, and he will hear, and unto him thou wilt perform thy vows. So he says, then when you pray to him, he'll hear. Unlike now, where you pray to God and there's no answer, then you'll pray to him and he'll hear. And then you'll perform your vows to him. He says, well, you're probably making vows to God. God, if you'll just hear me, if you'll just restore my prosperity, then I'll do this and this. Well, God will give you back your prosperity, and you'll have the wealth and the means to fulfill those vows, Job, if you'll just turn back to God. Verse 28, The thing that thou purposest shall come to pass, and over all thy ways the light shall shine. So he says, with God on your side, all your purposes and plans that you come up with, what will happen? They'll prosper again like they used to. And over all your ways the light will shine. Oh, God's light shining over your ways. Like it used to. God's light used to shine on Job's ways. He says that'll happen again if you'll just turn from your sin and come back to God. Verse 29, When others are depressed, then thou shalt say, Look up, for humble men he will exalt. He says when other people are depressed, you can act like I'm acting right now. You can go up to him and say, oh, poor guy. But look up. If you're just humble to God, he'll exalt you. You'll be able to say that to him like I can say that to you right now, Job. Verse 30, Yea, he doth let the innocent escape, so too shalt thou through innocence of hands. Yes, you'll be able to say to this pressed one, he lets the innocent escape. Just stop being guilty and be innocent, and then you can escape. And he says, just like you could say to that depressed person in that glowing future day if you just turn back to God, so I say that to you now, Job. If you were in my spot, you'd be saying the same thing. And you see what I'm saying is right. I say to you, if you will just have innocent hands, if you'll just put away the sin that obviously caused all this and have innocent hands, why then all will be good for you. I'm saying it to you now. If you'll take my advice, why just watch. You'll be saying it to someone else in the future. That's what Eliphaz claims. Nice sounding words, but his advice is useless because it's completely wrong. Because Job never did all the wicked things to cause this to happen to him that Eliphaz claimed he had done. So we get to chapter 23 and Job's answer. Verse 1, then Job answered and said. Verse 2, and again reading from Bullinger's version, today again my plaint is bitter still. His hand is heavier than all my groans. So he says that my complaint is still bitter. And he says, my suffering, God's hand on me that's causing me to suffer. It's heavier, it's actually worse. My suffering is worse than all my groans. I can't express how much I'm suffering. So he says, friends, don't you get how much I'm suffering? Don't you see it? All my groaning, all my sorrowing can't express how much I'm suffering. Verse 3, oh, that I knew where I might find him, knew how I might come onto his judgment seat. He says, you say I should get acquainted with God. If you only knew how much I long to find God. How much I wanted to come before his judgment seat. You say, you're rejecting God and won't come to him. I say, I want nothing more than to come to God. I can't. I don't know where to find him. I want to come before his court, but I don't know where it is. You say, go to God. What do you think I'm trying to do? Verse 4, I would set out my cause before his face, and I would fill my mouth with arguments. He imagines that if he did get to come into God's court, if he did get to stand before him, why he would argue his case well. He would show God, I didn't do a lot of wicked things. I didn't do anything to cause this. Why are you causing me all this suffering? So he's quite sure he can make a good case before God. Verse 5, and well I know how he would answer me, and understand what he to me would say. So Job fully believes that God would admit his innocence, and that he didn't deserve all the calamity he suffered. So he says, God would admit that if I brought it to him. I don't think that God is unjust and would say I deserve this when I don't. But he wants to understand what he would say to me. He says, I would love to hear God's answer. Well, this, of course, is what we know is going to happen at the end of Job. God isn't going to come, and he is going to speak to Job and give his answer. Verse 6, would he, with his great power, contend with me? Nay, he would surely set on me his heart. He says, if I came before God and pled my cause, would he just use his mighty power to strike me down yet again? No, I don't believe he would. He would set on me his heart, his strength of character. He would heart me. He would encourage me. I'm sure he would. He wouldn't be like you. And Job has a right view of God here. He knows God wouldn't be unjust. He knows God wouldn't be cruel. But why does it never occur to Job, therefore, that God isn't the one who's doing all this to him? Why does it never occur to him that it's an enemy? But it doesn't. Verse 7, there I, an upright man, would plead with him, and so forever from my judge go free. So he believes himself to be an upright man, and God himself testifies that he was an upright man. So he thinks that if he got to plead his case before God's court, God, his judge, would let him go free forever. Forever there is the Hebrew word netzach, meaning perpetually, from then on. Verse 8, lo, to the east I go, he is not there. And to the west, but I perceive him not. He says, you say I should seek God's acquaintance? What do you think I'm doing? I look to the east and to the west. Now the King James has forward and backward, but understand in the Hebrew way of orienting themselves, they would always orient themselves facing east toward the sunrise. So east is forward, west was backward, south was your right hand, north was your left hand. So he says forward, backward. Bullinger says that means east and west. I think he's right. He says, I look for God. I would love to make acquainted with him, like you say, but I look for him in the east, he's not there. I look for him in the west, he's not there. Verse 9, or north, where he doth work, I look in vain. Or in the south, he hides where none can see. Again, on the left hand where he works, is that's north. And the Bible always seems to represent that God's mountain, that God's temple, his authority is in the north, seeming to indicate that maybe heaven is north from the earth. He says, I look north, I look in vain. I don't see him up there. I look south, and he's hidden where no one can see. Now understand, they realized from explorers and so forth that there were stars in the southern sky that nobody in the north could see. So the south was the hidden place, where there were hidden things in the skies that you couldn't see in the north where most people lived. So the south was the hidden place. He says God is hidden in the south. He's hidden in the north where he does all his work. He's hidden in the south where everything is hidden. I can't find him. Verse 10, but mine habitual way he knoweth well. If tried, I know I should come forth as gold. He says God knows right where to find me. My ways are not hidden from God. Eliphaz suggested that Job thought his ways were hidden from God. Job says, I know my ways aren't hidden from God. The problem is that God's ways are hidden from me. I know God knows right where I am. The problem is I don't know where God is. I would like to stand before God and plead my case, or at least talk with him. Find out why he's doing this, but I don't know where to find him to do that. But I know God knows right where I am. And you are wrong to say that I think he doesn't. So in this portion, Eliphaz claims Job must be thinking that God cannot see and cannot judge his ways. But Eliphaz insists, well, of course God can see you, Job. So he must be judging you correctly. He knows you're wicked. You must therefore have sinned, and this is your rightful punishment. And so if you would just return to God and be innocent, why then you could return to prosperity and wealth. Yet Job insists he wants to have God judge him. He wants to have his ways appear before God because he believes they're righteous. But the problem is he can't find God. God is hidden from him. But Eliphaz was wrong. Job knows that God can see him. Job knows that God can judge him. But he asks, why won't God appear to me? I think that God would declare me innocent. I know I'm innocent. I think God would say the same thing. But I don't know where to find him in order to bring my case before him. He knows where to find me. I don't know where to find him. Well, as always, Job doesn't know anything about the contest between God and Satan, or that it's Satan causing all his suffering. Well, Job is certainly not done with his answer to Eliphaz. The rest of chapter 23 and chapter 24, he continues to give him answer. And we will discuss more of Job's answer to Eliphaz's third and final argument next time. Thank you for watching. Please, below, like, and if you will, and comment if you have the time. We'd love to see your comments, and both likes and comments help promote our videos, so it helps. Please do it. And until we gather again around the pages of God's book, I bid you goodbye.